Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Tuesday, April 16th, 2013, and this is episode number 65.
In this episode, we're going to discuss Flatter's battle with Twitter, stats about mobile messaging systems, Daft Punk's social album release, Dove Real Beauty sketches, and much more. We're kind of going all over the map on this one, huh?
Yeah, we're a lot of little things happened this past week that we figured it'd be nice to cover, but yeah, no central theme. Though I think a lot of interesting things that are, kind of coming together. A lot of, mobile, some social, some local, a lot of good stuff rolled into one.
Well, that's appropriate for the SoLoMo show that we would be doing that. What do we got on our news plate today?
Well, first off, I feel like we should acknowledge the fact that we are recording this on Foursquare Day. It is April 16th, which Foursquare being, the company that does social, local, mobile, kind of one of the original innovators in the space. They celebrate April 16th because it's 416 or 4 squared. I think somebody actually handed that to them as like an idea, and they're like, oh, that actually makes sense. But, I don't know about you. Did you do the Foursquare Day check-in to get the badge? I know that I did, but
I have forgot about doing that in the past, but thanks to actually looking and seeing I think you may have shared with me yours earlier today for the episode, and I went, oh, I got to make sure I check in someplace. So I got it this time.
There you go. That was actually one that we shared on our Facebook page. So if you need a good reason to check out our Facebook page, it's for nice little tidbits like that. If you missed today being Foursquare Day, had you subscribed to our Facebook page, you would have been alerted and could have checked in somewhere and got the very special badge that you could have added to the hundreds of other Foursquare badges that you've acquired.
And been able to, protest with your boss and ask him for the day off. Tell him, look, man, it's a holiday. Come on, didn't you hear about Foursquare Day? And then we could laugh at that failure. But I was going to ask you, did you get the day off being in a digital marketing company? Did they give the entire, did they have cake in the office or anything like that? But probably not, right?
No, not so much. I did actually, I got to run a special for one of my clients, which was fun. Did a little check-in special, and so went through the process of kind of authorizing their account onto my own account, which is interesting. Now, so Foursquare, when you request an authorization, you can have them mail you a card, and that's free, but if you want to expedite the process, they'll actually send you a whole process and a system that uses a code, but it costs you $1. So they're sort of using that as like a capture to make sure it's legitimate requests, but they call you and you actually have to leave a voicemail message that sort of describes who you are and what your relationship is to the company. And then they actually have a person manually review that and be like, yes, this person probably should be authorized for that. Or, no, this person has no idea who this is. And I'm not going to give them control over like the local McDonald's to make updates and all that sort of thing. So kind of an interesting process that I went through. And then also creating a special I hadn't done that in a while. There's some interesting opportunities there. You can, do all the various, everybody that checks in or every 10 check-ins. There's a lot of different steps and setups and everything. So kind of a fun little learning process that I went through this past week.
Very cool. Anything else on the news platter?
Indeed. We got a quick bit of follow-up. So we talked about Flattr, F-L-A-T-T-R, in a previous episode, and they announced some news that could have some pretty far-reaching results for them. So they blogged about the fact today that Twitter has essentially cut them off. Twitter sent them not a cease and desist, but they sent them a very strongly worded email that said, you are no longer going to be allowed to do what you're doing on our network. And they quoted some stuff about the API, saying that you can't monetize actions within the system. So if you favorite a tweet and are a Flattr member, those tweet favorites no longer count towards your Flattr distributions, which I think is interesting. One, it sort of continues this trend of Twitter, fighting back against developers. Huh? Exactly. They're picking and choosing. They are no longer the developer's best friend. If you've got an interesting idea, Twitter is probably not the place for that, unless you're hoping to ramp this thing up, 2 months later, call them up and be like, do you want to buy it? And then if not, sell it off. Because with this, it's like, all they're doing is saying, okay, if somebody favorites something, we're adding monetization to that. And Twitter said, no go. But also, we talked about in previous episodes sort of this idea of will Flattr make it, or is Flattr, ever going to get off the ground? And I think that this could potentially be something that sort of answers that question and says, no, they are not going to make it, because it's tough though. But like, if you cut off a major network, this isn't like, Snapchat isn't going to let you favorite Snapchat photos. This is one of the biggest social networks. And so the fact that now, what does that leave you with? That leaves you with Facebook, and it leaves you with, YouTube favorites. But taking Twitter favorites away, that's something, it's a low barrier to entry. I favorite a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of users favorite things. And it's also a pretty streamlined process. So you think to yourself, okay, I like what this person tweets. I'll just favorite a couple things. Maybe they get some money. That's clean. But now it's, well, I like what they tweet, but I can't actually support them through Flattr, so now you're second-guessing Flattr. So my guess would be this is bad news for Flattr, but we'll have to see how this all plays out.
Well, and it's also very much related, like I told you, to something that happened within the same week here, related to a startup called Ribbon, I think is the name of it. And Ribbon, what they were trying to do is essentially, if you imagine Bitly, right? You create unique links that are trackable, that get redirected to a particular place. It's almost like monetizing, being able to sell something through Bitly. So you create a unique little, if somebody wants to sell something, whether it be real goods or digital goods, you can very, very quickly create this shortened link that actually comes back to this Ribbon page, which is like a very small landing page that's optimized really to just show off this product and then make it easy for somebody to buy the product, I think maybe with PayPal or something like that. It's a really interesting concept for folks who don't have the time to create an e-commerce store or want to do pushes for small products. And they like announced all of a sudden one morning, it was on TechCrunch and everything, that they had created this, they have the content cards in Twitter where you can actually see the content embedded directly in the tweet. And they said, we're the first thing that can now sell and monetize content, directly in a tweet. Then it was like within 2 hours, Twitter shut them down.
I did see that, actually. I remember that. I remember looking at it being like, how the heck did they even manage this in the first place? But
I think they just did the API stuff, but it's pretty funny because it's not like they just suddenly had it happen overnight. They had to have been testing this and seeing that it was there before they went and announced it. It was as if, for some strange reason, Twitter happens to only be looking at TechCrunch for potential use of their API. But it's a really interesting use of it. And again, it's about monetizing something. And Twitter has kind of said, sorry, we don't allow that. And so the two of these things really send a strong signal that they are the ones that are control monetization of whatever it ends up being. And there's some news that I got today about what Twitter's going to do to kind of take their advertising to the next step regarding video. So we'll probably talk about that in a future episode.
Interesting. All right. I've heard that, and I've heard rumors about Facebook video as well. Some $1 million figures being thrown around, which we will have to see.
I saw that also. Yep.
Yeah. I remember that reminds me a lot of the Apple iAd when those first came out, and it was like $1 million, and then a couple months later it was like 500,000, and then a couple months later it was like, give us $100,000, please. So I was like, $1 million sounds good in the initial press release, but whether or not brands can continue to pay that. Of course, there's going to be brands that right out of the gate, they're like, oh, we'll be first, and kind of get people before they even know what to ignore. But 2 months down the road,
I like that. Before they know what to ignore. So we're throwing around a lot of numbers here, but we do actually want to cover some numbers of the week, right? With some metrics here.
Yeah, so we're going to group a couple of different things together because it kind of falls into this bucket of mobile messaging systems. And we'll start off with Snapchat since we mentioned them in the episode already. Snapchat came out with some official numbers, which as far as I know is, they haven't done that too often. The last time that they announced numbers was in December, and they said that users were sending over 50 million Snapchats per day. And just a few short months later, they actually now announced that users are sending more than 150 million photos per day. So, nearly a threefold increase in a little under 4 months. So Snapchat seems to be on a continued strong growth path, which, I will say I'm a little surprised by. I wasn't quite sure if Snapchat was going to be this, it's interesting, but then 2 weeks later we're on to the next thing. But it really seems to have tapped into a behavior that not a lot of other channels have tapped into. And, I know a lot of the younger users like it. It's sort
Remind
of
folks what it is again.
So Snapchat is sending photo, and I believe you can also send text messages, but they are limited in time. So you can set it anywhere between, I think, 1 and 10 seconds. I know 10 seconds is the max. I don't know if they have a minimum, but essentially you send that, and as soon as the person views it, the countdown starts, and then once that timer ends, the message is deleted from the system, and it no longer exists.
It's kind of like self-destructive content, almost like, Mission Impossible. After 10 seconds, this message will self-destruct, and then suddenly it's gone, and who would have thought that would have been a popular dynamic for a social network, right?
Exactly. If Tom Cruise had developed a mobile app, it might have been Snapchat. Your message, shall you choose to accept it? Dun,
exactly.
dun, dun, dun.
Exactly.
And then the other application we wanted to touch on is WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is something that we have also discussed on previous episodes of the SoLoMo show. And they actually announced some pretty hefty numbers. So they are claiming 200 million monthly active users, which according to them and according to comparing numbers actually makes them bigger than Twitter, which is interesting to think about, and interesting to think about the implications of that. And, those 200 million, those aren't casually active users. Those are very active users because they're claiming 8 billion inbound and 12 billion outbound messages per day, which is insane. To be fair, WhatsApp is essentially a replacement for SMS messaging, so it's being used in a lot of these emerging markets where maybe SMS messaging is too expensive, so they can get WhatsApp, and it's sort of a workaround for some of those costs. But 8 billion and 12 billion messages per day is staggering, and so definitely something to keep an eye on. I think we talked about how brands, maybe for a smaller brand there might be some opportunities for WhatsApp. For larger brands, it's more of a one-to-one communication system, so it's going to be challenging. But hey, at a size like that, it's definitely something that I think you have to pay attention to one way or another, especially if you're interested in the mobile space.
And just like you said, this is a replacement for text messaging, primarily because not everybody in the world has iMessages, which you can go from iOS device for free. Now there's a lot of carriers that now offer text messaging as part of your sort of unlimited text messaging as part of your basic plan. But for the most part, a lot of other places in the world, folks actually have to pay for their text messaging. And in other carriers as well in the US, they still do. And so this is kind of a workaround for that. And it adds sort of an additional layer on top of it. And, any information that you see around teenagers for the most part, will show you that a big preference of theirs is to use text messaging. And so, it's very different, obviously, than the way that people would use Twitter. So that this would be sort of expected.
Yeah. And just to put the numbers in context, Apple's iChat, they're probably bigger than this now, but recently they announced that they were sending 1 billion messages per day. So WhatsApp is already somewhere between 8 and 12 times as big as Apple's iChat, which is pretty impressive to think about. So again, I don't know that we have huge recommendations for marketers right now, other than just keep an eye on it and, watch it evolve. And, if the service decides to cater to sort of one-to-many messaging, that could definitely be something to evaluate in the future.
Yep.
All right, so let's dive into our main topic for today, which is Daft Punk, the well-known sort of unique and always interesting band, had a unique and interesting way of promoting their new album. The album itself came as a surprise. So the fact that they, did some really interesting things to build buzz, I think shows that they really understand the power of, catching people off guard and hitting them with a very powerful message at the right time. So Adam, why don't you walk us through a little bit of what Daft Punk did to amplify the buzz for their upcoming album?
Sure. So for those that are fans of Daft Punk, they've had a number of really successful albums, but I believe their last album didn't even come out. They haven't released an album since probably around 2006, maybe 2007. And at that time, a lot of these social networks either didn't exist or were in their infancy. And probably the most popular, obviously, at the time was Facebook, or maybe even Friendster or something like that. And so the marketing potential of those sort of platforms was really kind of at a minimum. MySpace at the time didn't do a heck of a lot to make it easy for you to advertise in their platform, back then. And so this is sort of a new and interesting way that Daft Punk has decided with their latest release of their album that comes out in like a month. They took a bit of a new approach in kind of creating the buzz. This weekend was the Coachella Music Festival, and they wanted to, rather than perform there, and I think that because they kind of want to make such a big deal of it, and they have the potential to be a really, really popular band, but they do want this album, as far as it sounds to me, they want this album to be somewhat of a summer hit. So rather than kind of release it early and kind of off timing from when they think is ideal and be at Coachella to support the album by performing all these new tracks, or in contrast, being at Coachella and performing a bunch of old tracks instead of the new ones that everybody will want to hear. What they did is they kind of stood back, and at Coachella, they leveraged mobile and social. And the way they did this was they essentially took over the screens across the entire Coachella festival and played a 1.5-minute video preview teaser sort of thing, as they're calling it, of their new album with kind of this steady, really cool lick of one of their main lead songs that they're going to have probably as their lead single for the radio. And just basically played it, just surprised everybody and played it all over the place for that 1.5 minutes. And then they stood back as this was happening and kind of monitored what was going on Twitter immediately during that and afterwards, and seeing what was the people were capturing it with photos and capturing it with a little YouTube video that they were sharing with their friends. They were putting it on Facebook, tweeting about the reactions, all those things. So the really interesting thing about that is they were able to, in a way, monitor the excitement and see what people thought of it in real time as that was happening and being shared. And additionally, they, I would assume, understood that whatever happened with that 1.5 minute video, that was enough without having to be there to perform or any of that sort of thing. That was enough to actually still take advantage of this group of mobile and social fans who were there to amplify this buzz and amplify what was happening, because those folks are sharing it with so on. The second part to this is that they've also now relied on YouTube to create a series of videos called the Collaborators, I think is what they call it, and they themselves are kind of characters. They wear robot looking suits and they don't ever talk and all that. It's primarily the music, and then they have other people, sing and stuff like that. And so what they did is they allowed the collaborators, the folks that they have actually collaborating on the album with them, to do the talking about meeting up with these guys and the process of making the songs and all that. And they turned it into a series of videos on YouTube for people to just kind of get this sort of buzz moving, this momentum going about, oh my gosh, I can't wait. I've heard all about how the process is being made, the album is being made, and so on. And they've done it in conjunction with Intel, and I believe it's a media company called Vice. And they've put it on a channel called The Creators Project, as well as a website called The Creators Project, which essentially is like a blog in conjunction again with Intel and Vice, and talking about all kinds of creative endeavors that people are doing, including even the lights on the Bay Bridge that we have over here and that were released, kind of the public in to a lot of fanfare a month or 2 or 3 ago as well. So I find it really interesting that Intel has kind of jumped in there and said, look, these are a great sort of group to partner with. And to have our brand visible with, kind of similar to how they jumped out there with somebody like will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas and made him their sort of a very visible creative director. It's a little awkward in that sense, but at the same time, it's like Intel is trying to be the cool brand by aligning themselves, even though in the end they're not really making the PCs, they're only making parts to it, but they're trying to align themselves in the hearts of the young folks as this sort of hip and cool driver of technology. Did you get to check anything? Oh, I didn't know. Well, I'm looking inside the show notes. Sorry, and I just saw one at the very bottom here that kind of surprised me. Did you check out any of these things, any of the videos or the posts or anything like that talking about what they did?
I did. So a couple things that I thought were interesting from this. The first would be that they really focused on content creation, which I think is an overall trend that I'm really starting to notice. I'm actually starting to advise clients on is, the concept of a social application or a microsite is really starting to go away. And I think, that's in response to some of the changes that Facebook's been making and just some of the changes in the way that people access content and the challenges of creating websites that are viewable on desktop and mobile and all the different places people are interacting. So rather than having to build these huge applications and huge experiences and then worrying about, how are people getting here and how are they interacting with it and all this stuff, brands are getting creative with original content. So, Adam, you talk about them working with Intel and working with Vice for this creators project. Well, that's leveraging the audience that Intel and Vice have built up and then using that audience in a unique way and saying, okay, we're going to tell our story. Let's tell our story on this channel that we know has an audience, we know has people tuning in. And, they could have put it on a microsite, but I think they did better with some of these partnerships in terms of not having to start from scratch. They started with an audience already existing. The other thing, and sort of an extension of that, is really, finding innovative uses for some of these existing channels. So they wanted to debut their track list, and they did so by releasing a 6-second Vine video. And you kind of think to yourself, well, how did they manage, an entire track list in 6 seconds? It was essentially just a rapid-fire slideshow. I think they've got like 13 tracks, so shows their logo, and then song 1, song 2, song 3, song 4. And it's just a pretty simple Vine video. But what's interesting, so 2 things I noticed. The first is each of the song tracks actually fades in and out. And if you've played with Vine, you know that it's not possible to actually, insert effects like that, fades in, fades out, that sort of thing. And so doing that, I think what they essentially did is they held a camera up to some sort of screen, created this 6-second video, and then recorded that video with their phone to actually share the Vine video. So I thought that was interesting. But 2, just the fact that they released it on Vine, you had people, kind of discovering this and then doing their best to annotate the video and be like, okay, what are the names of these things as it's flashing by? And you've got to watch it 20 times to kind of catch each of the tracks.
Or you just keep tapping it so it pauses, at certain times and all that.
That's true.
Don't do it the hard way, Corey. Don't do it the hard way.
But still, you have to interact with it. But people are big fans of the brand, and so they were like, oh, I feel like I discovered this, and I can get some credit myself for annotating this and sharing it out, so that other people don't have to watch the Vine video as well. They can see kind of a written list. So it was an interesting, it would have been Daft Punk, sure, they could have fired up their Facebook page and been like, hey, here's, the names of our 13 tracks. But I think by embracing Vine, they saw an opportunity to experiment with a new channel. This wasn't, the big debut of their entire thing. This was a sort of a side thing of, hey, we've got to share our track list anyways. Let's do so through Vine, do it in an interesting way, and maybe build a little bit of extra buzz by being an experimenter on this new channel.
It's the whole thing that they did with Vine is, well, and like you were saying, did they do it on a screen or whatever? I don't know if you had a chance to see that the studio, I don't know if it was Sony that did this or Fox or whoever, but they actually created a 6-second preview trailer for the Wolverine movie. And that one doesn't look like it's recorded off a screen. So, it's funny. They leaked that, I don't know, 2 or 3 days before the trailer was supposed to happen, the full version of the trailer. But it's directly uploaded to Vine. It's not off of a screen.
I don't know.
There's got to be a partnership going on where these guys are reaching out to Twitter, and Twitter's going, look, guys.
Maybe, but I will say that I've played with Vine and I've recorded off a screen, and I know that you can get very high quality, very polished looking video, including sound, into a Vine video if you're creative with the environment that you record your screen off of and how you set it up in terms of actually getting that recording done. I do know it's possible because I've done it myself. So yes, maybe they've got some backdoor deals and they're doing things that other brands don't have access to. But again, if you're creative and you play around with the tool and you say, okay, I know what everybody is already doing, but what else is possible, and kind of experiment. There are ways of doing some different things that maybe, again, kind of surprise people and do something unexpected.
Yeah, I just thought it was really, really cool as things were coming together, and I was checking out what they were doing with the videos, and then, of course, there was the article that I shared with you, Corey, that was really talking more about this sort of partnership. Everybody else was kind of talking about the music. This was talking a bit more about how they were in a way innovating on sharing it. It's not like there aren't any other artists that have taken advantage of social media, but it's interesting to see how they're doing this, even considering their sort of personas where they themselves are not really the vocal spokespersons, because you don't really see who they are. They're really silent sort of robots. And I know it sounds funny to our listeners who aren't Daft Punk fans that, what are you talking about? Go check them out. You'll see what I'm talking about. But it was pretty cool nonetheless.
All right. Well, Adam, we're going to continue our interview series from the Marketo Users Summit, because you had a chance to talk with Marcus Nelson, the founder and CEO of Advocate, ADDVOCATE. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into that interview.
Sure thing. So I bumped into Marcus, and Marcus, as you'll hear, has worked at a couple other startups. He founded another startup, and then he was actually doing social for Salesforce. So he's got a lot of good insights, and he shared with us why he feels that Advocate has a space, and what Advocate is, and why it might be important to some of our listeners here to consider checking out. So I'm talking to Marcus Nelson. He is the CEO and founder of Advocate with 2 D's in it. I'm sure advocate.com was somehow taken or something like that, right?
It's amazing. Yeah.
And you've done a lot of things. And most of the things that you've done, to my knowledge at least, have been focused around people and users. So, users, when you were going and working at, what was the first place you founded?
User Voice.
At User Voice. And then you moved on to?
Salesforce.
And now you're with?
Advocate.
All right, this is not a test, I swear to God. But the interesting thing that you're doing with Advocate is a little bit different than, say, focusing on the customers. You're actually focusing internally on the teams and the employees at the enterprise level, right?
Of course, yeah.
Can you describe a little bit about why you started Advocate and what it does, or what you guys are doing? What's your mission?
Well, you got to start from the beginning. Here I was at Salesforce.com. We had 3,200 employees when I came to the company. In the 3 years that I was there, when I left, we had 10,000 employees. And if I didn't know what somebody did when I first got there, I really didn't know what anybody did when I left, because there's just so many people. We grew so fast. And the problem was, I was supposed to manage the social media, and I never knew who was representing us on social channels, because I would love to, and this is my personal belief, but I love recognizing people for their efforts. And if I can't validate them for their efforts, if I don't know who they are, how can I validate them? Right. I think the number one reason why somebody leaves a job is they don't feel appreciated, and social media gives you that opportunity to represent your brand and to advocate on the behalf of your brand. And what ends up happening is that those people aren't being measured or monitored with all the other community managers whose job it is to actually be on social. And I think brands just miss out on that. They hire 5, college interns and, train them up and then spit them out and say, look, go represent our brand. And the problem is, where's the knowledge of the company in these people that you just hired? The people who have the best customer engagement type of knowledge are your workers, the people that have been there for 3, 5, 10 years. And we're not enabling them to benefit, or the company's not enabling them to get the benefit from having them represent their brand.
It reminds me very much of kind of a lot of times people, when we talked with them about content marketing, for instance, or who's going to generate content, they're always thinking of who's that one person that's going to take care of it, or who's the one person that might understand how to write well or take photos well, or whatever the case may be. But they don't actually think about just how would they capture content within from those assets, which are their employees, which is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And what you're doing with Advocate is kind of helping to mine that and to make it easier to do so and to empower those employees, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The number one thing that we're trying to do is first identify the employees that want to represent your brand. So it's all opt-in. We don't force any of your employees. You can market it internally the way that you want. They opt in, they get on the service, they install our browser plugin, they put in their Twitter, their Facebook, LinkedIn, what have you. And once they've done that, we now have them in a profile. It's kind of like Pinterest type of look and feel, and they've got their little face on there. And now you can actually see who's representing your brand. The second part of it is, as they're using the product to suggest content for each other, or to retweet or repost messages that they've been suggested, we measure all that. And so in that way we can give you your own personal leaderboard. You can see how you're doing against your peers, and then you can aggregate it all together and see how each employee is doing across platforms, or not platforms, I'm sorry, but across your departments or across your workforce.
So there's a little bit of gamification motivation going on there and everything?
Yep, and it's done in a healthy way. We don't give away prizes. We may do badges. We're kind of playing with that idea. We may actually farm that out to a third party. But yeah, the being able to, first of all, see who's representing your brand and then empower them to amplify your message is massive. And then we go to these kind of next levels where we're going to start measuring the content. We'll do some keyword analysis. We'll be able to suggest to you what kind of content's really reverberating in your community. And so I think that if you knew that stuff was working, you'd probably make different decisions about where you're spending money on developing content and focus on the things that were working and what were resonating rather than just kind of willy-nilly develop stuff.
So it really sounds like it's tapping into those assets, like you said, and it's helping leverage those guys. It's leverage the folks that are most passionate, hopefully, about your brand, right?
Yeah, of course.
In order to also extend the reach of your content as well. What are some of the other ways that you think folks can benefit from taking advantage of this approach with Advocate?
Well, a couple different things. One is that employees want to represent their brand. If they love your brand, they're going to talk about you whether you measure them or not. Period. But there's also this other group of people that probably work for your company and they don't know what to say, or they don't want to say the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. So guess what they end up doing?
Not saying anything at all.
Not saying anything at all. And this is where we're really trying to step in there and help you by helping you get your crafted messages that have already been blessed by PR or what have you, and get that into their hands. We always encourage our brands, hey, do the 80-20% rule. Don't talk about yourself all the time. Maybe 20% of the time you're talking about yourself, but the other 80%, talk about what's interesting in your industry or things that are kind of thought leadership that maybe people that you trust in your industry that are talking about, or news articles or current events. That way people get this good mishmash of stuff, and it's not just you wah, 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 around your brand. Yeah, nobody wants that guy. Nobody likes the guy at the cocktail party that just talks about himself. So we try to encourage them, suggest content that's interesting and adds value to the conversation.
So if somebody wanted to kind of get on board with this, is it pretty straightforward? Is it turnkey? How would you describe getting on board with this?
Yeah, it's really turnkey. You can get up and going in a couple of minutes. You just sign up. You send you an email just to verify that it is a work address. Once you verify it, you can start sending out invitations. People install their browser plugins, and off you go.
Are there anything in the roadmap you want to share with folks that you think might be coming out soon?
Yeah, we have an enterprise product that's coming out that will integrate with your Active Directory or LDAP system. And what that is it creates an opportunity for you to create roles and permissions around those users. So if you want people to have permission to be able to tweet on behalf of your brand from your branded channels, you can definitely do that through the system. The nice thing about doing it through Active Directory is that as you provision those users through the roles and permissions, when they leave the company, you're going to deprovision them in the LDAP system anyway. And so in Active Directory, the moment you turn that off, their phone goes off, all of the systems that they log into, their computers, they can no longer have services. It tells, what do you call it? Where you sit. What's that called?
Where you sit?
Yeah, there's a word for that. Yeah, the desk that you sit at. Yeah, it tells them that desk is open now and available for a new
human resources and everything.
Right. And here these systems have been around for 25 years, and nobody's really sat down and said, maybe we should connect these to our social channels. So like what happened to Burger King or HMV or Jeep, where people were giving away passwords or being tricked into giving up their passwords, that could never happen because they're not getting a password in the first place.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's the evolution of things where, only a few years ago, now there's the thing of when folks are getting their cell phones, right? Before you had your phone on your desk, then you got cell phones. Now it's the bring your own phone, right? There's that paradigm that's happening, and being able to kind of disconnect that from an account if you let somebody go or if they move on to another job. Well, this is exactly in the same boat, right?
Yep.
And people need to consider doing the exact same thing for their employees, or those examples, like you said, for those that know about Burger King and I'm trying to remember the other one because it seems like the last one is the one we always remember.
Burger King, Jeep, HMV. HMV was the real, this is where our service could have helped a lot because they laid off 160 employees.
Oh my gosh.
But nobody took away their Twitter credentials. And so these disgruntled employees who are just get mad at the world, and not that I'm siding with the brand or, I'm not trying to play that, but I mean, from a brand perspective, you don't want to be put in a situation. Granted, HMV probably didn't handle it the best way that they could have, but when you're put in that position, you don't want somebody who may have a seed of bitterness to have the ability to act out on it.
And that's more from the fear side, right? I mean, because I think that the part to focus on isn't that's what Advocate provides. What Advocate's providing is the ability to empower those folks that are still in your organization.
It's social enablement, right?
Enablement, that's great. So where can people find out about the product, and also where can they connect with you as well?
Advocate.com, so that's ADVOCATE. And if you want to contact me, I'm at Marcus Nelson on Twitter. Well, pretty much everywhere at Marcus Nelson.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marcus.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Good stuff. Well, let's dive into the lightning round because we've got a couple of interesting stories. So, Adam, do you want to take the first one or you want to pass this one to me?
I'll go for it. You got the timer ready?
I do. 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go.
So Dove, who has kind of been the purveyor of this real beauty, or who are, what is the real beauty, real women sort of thing, has turned around and created a YouTube video that has a forensic artist listen to a woman describe herself. He doesn't see her, and he draws her. Then he listens to somebody else describe the woman, that the same person, and then shows this woman afterwards the difference between how she perceives herself and how the other individual perceives herself, which usually ends up to her looking more appealing. This is a YouTube video. It's talking about real beauty and perception of beauty and so on. And I've been kind of looking at comments and asked some folks within my network what they think. And reactions kind of go all over the place, but it's actually, for a lot of people, striking some emotional chords with them, making them think, and has kind of made people shed a few tears here and there. So I want you to talk a little bit, Core, about what you think in regards to that.
All right. With 60 seconds on the clock, I will give my response. Ready and go. So I watched this and I thought it was really well done. I think the tone, the pacing, they've really nailed, they set out with what type of emotion. It wasn't just message, but it was an emotion, I think. And the thing that really struck me is it is a great video on its own, but really the strength in it is the fact that they've stuck with this message of real beauty and done campaign after campaign. You think of Dove, it's just a soap. They don't do anything that special, but they've really kind of captured this idea of we're a brand that celebrates women. We celebrate, not models, but real actual people, and how, everyone is beautiful, and you don't need, it's not this huge makeup company. They're not saying transform yourself. They're just saying, be clean, be beautiful, be fresh. And so I thought this was a great video. It was, that maybe a little long. I would be interested to see what a slightly shorter version was, because I felt there were parts that could have been shrunk down. But overall, I think it was, a powerful message.
Yeah, if you read the comments wherever it's posted, it's incredibly interesting. You have, some folks that are saying, well, we're too hung up on aesthetics and beauty and all that sort of thing. But I think it's one of those few videos where, although you might feel that way, ultimately, I think there really is some good, stuff that they've covered to the core of that, like you said. But I think it stirs up a really interesting conversation. It obviously affects some folks to the heart if you read some of those comments.
All right. Well, with 60 seconds back on the clock, I'm going to let you take this second story as well, because this was one that kind of happened to you personally. So I want to hear, what happened and why it kind of impressed you with what one news reporter was doing. So 60 seconds on the clock, ready and go.
So I woke up this morning and do what I normally do, which is check all the sort of networks that I'm a part of in order to get the news and the gist of what's happening both socially and worldly. And Mike Inouye, who is the traffic reporter for NBC 11 out here in the Bay Area, happened to share a photo and an update of a big traffic thing. A truck fell over on the middle of the freeway and all this sort of thing. And although I wasn't traveling there, I felt it important to share it. And actually, it was somebody else who had initially shared it. So I went ahead and shared it, and a lot of people found it useful. They said, thanks, and so on. But then afterwards, it was, a few more hours later, Mike Inouye himself came to that post and actually commented with an update about whether or not it had cleared and so on. And then even later on in the day, came back again on that same post and said, hey, you guys, it's all clear. You're safe to go. So I felt incredibly interesting to see that he acknowledged that Facebook was a valid way to share the news of what was going on.
All right, I'll put 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. So you sent this to me, and at first, I was like, "Oh, it's kind of clever." I had to dig in to kind of understand. What do you mean that he's responding to the share? And what was interesting is he actually went and responded to your post specifically, not his original item, but your item. And I was like, okay, well, how the heck did he find this thing? And then I went back to his original item, and then clicked to the 3 shares, and it brought up the 3 different threads that had been created, and that was just not a way that I'd even considered using Facebook before. So I'm sure I'm not alone. You've probably seen that little share icon, but you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, why do I want to be able to click to see each individual person's share? Well, this is a great example of that. So as a brand, I think there's, huge opportunities to leverage this. And when people are sharing your updates, go and click and look at the words that they're using and re-engage those people down the road, because I think those are, open opportunities for conversation that a lot of brands are missing out on right now.
Yeah, I really kind of hats off to him with that. I mean, it made me really think of it a bit differently as well. And I just kept thinking, this guy has the time to do this, and it obviously feels like a priority to him, right? And I think you share that information, and there's no real easy way to update people other than to kind of dive in the way that he did. So again, hats off to him.
All right, well, we covered a lot of great stuff this week, and there's plenty more to think about as these stories unfold. But as always, we would love to hear from our audience. If you've got questions, maybe you want to suggest a topic, you want to give us feedback, or hey, even if you just want to say hello, we highly encourage you to do so. The easiest way to reach us is via Twitter. We are both available at SoLoMo Show, or you can reach myself directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You can also email us. The email address is solomoshow@gmail.com. That's SOLOMOSHOW@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page that Corey mentioned earlier if you want to kind of get updates on things that we find between shows and may not even talk about during the shows. We're also on Google+. And we have an account on Pinterest where we have shared all the episodes almost so far. We've got a couple to catch up, me personally, to put up there. But you can go up there and reshare and repin our content to your heart's delight and share them with friends.
There you go. And as always, all of the links that we discussed today, as well as the links to the social channels we just mentioned, can be found in the show notes. And the easiest way to view those is at solomoshow.com. Each episode gets its own post, and we always include show notes, both direct posts and the things and links to the stuff that we talk about on the episode, but oftentimes we include supplementary links as well. So even if you listen to every single minute of this podcast, make sure to check out the show notes, because there's some added value there that you might be missing out on. And one more request. We try not to do this in every episode, but I wanted to just give a reminder that if you haven't yet, we would greatly appreciate a rating inside of iTunes. If you actually go to solomoshow.com/review, we put together a little how-to guide, because it's a little tricky in terms of the process to actually get into iTunes and where to leave your review, but it helps people discover the show. It helps us reach a new audience, and if you get value out of this, it's a little way of giving value back to us. So we would really appreciate it if you took a moment or two out of your day and gave us a rating on iTunes. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and we hope that you join us next week for another episode of The SoLoMo Show.
Take care.